the greatest president for Israel is currently in office. And he even applied 18% tariffs to Israel, sending shockwaves through the Israeli foreign ministry. He threatened the entire world with economic warfare and threatened to probably triple or quadruple the price of the butt plugs sold by Shmuley Botiuk's daughter, since they're probably made in China, along with most other goods sold in the souvenir shop of Trump Tower, and basically ended the era of globalization. Donald Trump's tariffs. I don't think we can avoid talking about it, although we don't often do economics on this show. I think this announcement by Donald Trump, which came without committees, without congressional involvement, was unilateral and came sort of by surprise. But if you've been following what Trump has been saying since the 1980s and 90s, not terribly surprising that he would do it, and is actually in line with the trajectory of American monetary policy since the first Trump era. And there's a through line in the Biden era. Biden had some protectionist policies as well. It all relates to China, as well as to the unsustainable nature of the US economy and globalization. I assume you agree, Aaron. So I think I'm speaking for both of us that corporate-led globalization, we both see it as terrible for this country. I mean, I watched what it did in the 90s. I was against NAFTA when I was like a teenager because it was just so obvious that we were shipping millions of jobs away that probably wouldn't come back, and it would destroy millions of lives. It would lead to some kind of crisis, which became like the opioid crisis, also the border crisis. And I saw how it destroyed the lives of Mexicans. The first article I ever wrote, ever as a journalist, which was for Salon.com, was about the serial killing of women in Ciudad Juarez. And they were all women who had come from the south of Mexico, who were poor, from a rural economy that was destroyed by NAFTA. And they were working in the auto parts manufacturing plants that had moved across the border from El Paso and elsewhere. And they were nameless and faceless, and they were just winding up in mass graves. And that was the first article I wrote back in, I think it was 2001 or 2002. So it's bad for Mexico, for 2/3 of Mexico. It's good for the elite. Corporate America made this decision without much input from the public. At least Congress voted on it. Members of Congress were bribed. It barely passed. And, here we are 40 years later, 30 years later, and, the U.S. depends on supply chains from abroad for essential goods. That's not very good for the U.S. The balance of payments is extremely bad. The deficit is unsustainable. And Donald Trump decides to announce tariffs against the entire world based on a haphazard mathematical formula. And it lasted about a week after sending panic through the capitalist class because stocks started to plunge. I mean, the first in the stock markets, S&P 500 going down, this was inevitable. I think Trump and Howard Lutnick, who was involved in setting that policy, Howard Lutnick being a bond guy, Besant, the Treasury Secretary, they knew that they could do this as long as they were able to lower Treasury yields. But the people who depend on the stock market, that part of the capitalist class, they were freaking out. And one of them is someone who predicted that Donald Trump would be the greatest president ever for the business community, but also who supported Donald Trump after being a Democrat because Donald Trump was going to criminalize Palestine solidarity activism. And that's Bill Ackman. This is Bill Ackman after Trump was elected in December. The business community is giddy with excitement about the Trump administration. I'm hearing this from everyone. Business leaders are becoming more confident about the country and the economy. They'll be making more investments, which will drive the economy and the stock market, reducing the cost of capital and bolstering confidence further, catalyzing investment and more growth in a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle. It sounds like paradise. Then Trump announces the tariffs. Tariffs being kind of like he kind of just announces them out of nowhere with one of his textbook Trump charts. April 3rd of this year, Bill Ackman. Sometimes the best strategy in a negotiation is convincing the other side that you are crazy. Remember, this is the Bill Ackman who drove the ouster of Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, because she would not criminalize the Students for Justice in Palestine chapter. And he elicited promises from the Trump administration that they would just crush the Ivy League schools unless they would do his bidding and the bidding of other Zionist donors on criminalizing Palestine. So now he's still trying to rationalize what Trump did. Stocks are tumbling. Trump won't back down. April 6th, Bill Ackman finally calls for a ceasefire. There's time for a ceasefire before millions of people get hurt. I looked at that and I was like, wait, is he calling for a ceasefire in Palestine where the Holocaust is happening? No, because Bill Ackman actually enjoys that. And his wife gifted Jeffrey Epstein a orb. His Israeli wife, Neri Oxman, who plagiarized her own PhD thesis, gave Jeffrey Epstein an orb in exchange for a large donation to her institute at MIT. Bill Ackman is a major Zionist donor. He's not calling for a ceasefire in Palestine. He's calling for a ceasefire on the tariffs because this concerns his own money and he's losing tons of money. Billionaires were losing billions. Trump had actually, it seemed like he'd taken on the capitalist class in order to bring manufacturing back to the US and tank the World Trade Organization. Then Trump starts to capitulate. He looks at the numbers. The numbers, these are numbers I think he and Besant, who by the way was George Soros's money manager, and Howard Lutnick didn't expect. This is Arnaud Bertrand looking at, these were the numbers on 2 days after Bill Ackman called for a ceasefire. Stocks down, yields surging, meaning treasury yields. The dollar is down. Arnaud Bertrand comments on a lot of economic issues. Stocks down, so savings are getting crushed. Bond yields surging, so America needs to pay more interest on its debt. Dollar down, so everything the U.S. buys abroad is more expensive. Massive tariffs, which is a tax on working class Americans, eating away at their spending power, which was already eroded by inflation. Inflation is still coming. American companies see surging cost and more difficulty doing business abroad with retaliatory measures and boycotts. All for what? So Americans can start making socks instead of Bangladeshi workers, so the US government can raise more money to fund an already insanely bloated military industrial complex. Absolutely senseless. I don't agree with everything he said. I think there were some industries that would benefit from tariffs. For example, I don't know, the fishing industry in what used to be known as the Gulf of Mexico. The auto industry, the United Auto Workers endorsed the tariffs. But the point is taken. Trump was destroying the economy. And the key thing there was that treasury yields were going up to 4.5%. And they wanted to keep them below 4. Now, normally when you do tariffs, like in 2018 when Trump did it, bonds, investors seek haven in bonds because they're more stable, and then the yields go down. But the so-called bond vigilantes, who could have been in China because China owns a lot of treasury bonds, a lot of treasury notes, decided to flee, to abandon bonds, abandoning U.S. bonds as a way of sending a message that you have to abandon this policy. And so Trump capitulated. And he also capitulated because he said he heard Jamie Dimon, who's basically like JP Morgan, financial criminal, walking the streets, who said this was going to lead to a recession. So he wasn't listening to Main Street. He was waiting for Wall Street to tell him that this was unacceptable, along with Bill Ackman. Here's Charlie Gasparino on Fox.
Oh, I mean, because of the mixed messaging, how can you doubt them? I mean, let's be clear what happened. Who capitulated here and why? And I don't want to say this because I'm a patriot. I'm an American. But it is the White House who capitulated based on everything I hear and all my sources. And the reason why is because of the bond market and what happened last night. Bessent knows this better than anybody. When you have yields on the 10-year rising to 5%, stuff starts shutting down. When you have the lending market screwed up. By the way, who was dumping the bonds? Somebody asked him if it was China, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't. It was Japan. While he was negotiating with Japan, according to my sources, who are running major money management firms that are involved in the bond market, without giving up names, Japan was dumping bonds because they believed this was not a great place to do business. That forced their hands. Now, what you can say, I think, legitimately here, is Trump decided to take the win. And here's why. There was overwhelmingly,
the win
deal potential here among the entire world, except for maybe China, right? Everybody really wanted something. So he did take the win, but make no mistake about it. Peter Navarro was talking as of yesterday about not taking the win, and now they did. And it's all because of the bond market. I want to point out.
I mean, and that's a key point. Peter Navarro, who Elon Musk, who was an opponent of the policy, was calling Peter Retardo, actually wanted to restructure the American economy along protectionist lines and keep this going until companies were forced to come back and provide jobs. I don't know if they were there, or at least bring their companies back to the US and bring the supply chains into American borders. And Trump supposedly took the win. I don't know what win he's talking about there.
The win he's talking about is that countries were lining up to negotiate with Trump.
Yeah, that's what Trump said.
That's what Fox News is trying to say is the win.
Yeah. Trump said 75 countries came to negotiate with him, and he was asked to produce a list of which 75 countries had come to, as he said, kiss his ass. And he refuses to produce the list. He won't say who is coming to the table to whimper. And I'm sure some countries are, and they're going to offer all kinds of incentives, bribes to the Trump family. That's another reason I think Trump is doing this. They're going to hire tons of lobbyists. This is going to be it would be a boon for K Street, but now lobbyists are all confused. So it doesn't. I don't see where the win is. And then you have all of these Trump cultists who have had to say that this is the art of the deal. Somehow Trump scored some giant victory here. The stock market continues to tank. All three indexes ended on a loss yesterday. Inflation is coming. He just stopped the process of possibly a sovereign debt crisis and a default on the U.S. credit. But this was brilliantly executed by the real Donald Trump. Textbook Art of the Deal by Bill Ackman. I mean, that's what they all have to say. So hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't buy this line coming out of the White House that all of a sudden they really care about the average worker. Like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who's a hedge fund guy, is sounding an awful lot like Bernie Sanders. So I want to play a couple of his clips. This is what he said just the other day.
For the last 4 decades, basically since I began my career in Wall Street has grown wealthier than ever before, and it can continue to grow and do well. But for the next 4 years, the Trump agenda is focused on Main Street. It's Main Street's turn. It's Main Street's turn to hire workers. It's Main Street's turn to drive investment. And it's Main Street's turn to restore the American dream.
I mean, so this guy coming from Wall Street all of a sudden is like, have all these guys just had epiphanies where all of a sudden now they want to serve Main Street, not Wall Street. And here's more about him talking to Tucker Carlson.
The distribution of equities across households, the top 10% of Americans own 88% of equities, 88% of the stock market. The next 40% owns 12% of the stock market. The bottom 50 has debt. They have credit card bills, they rent their homes, they have auto loans, and we've got to give them some relief. That I was struck by the statistic from last year.
That's the message right there. Just as a bystander, I'm like, wow, okay.
All right, or that I like the examples, and I was really struck by two different statistics last year. Summer of 2024, Americans took more European vacations than they had in history. Summer of 2024, more Americans were using food banks than they ever have in history. I went into two food banks near my hometown to ask, what's the story? And they said, it really takes, for a lot of people, it's a loss of dignity to walk in a food bank.
Of course.
But they were seeing a new phenomenon, that it wasn't their traditional clientele. It wasn't people who'd lost their homes. It wasn't people out on the street. These were working families who could no longer, $100 at the grocery store, that basket of groceries every week, they were missing 5, 6, 7 things, and they were coming to the food bank to top up. So that's not a great America. Record European vacation, record food banks.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great, but like, what are you doing for people who rely on food banks? The price of eggs right now is still very high. The Republicans just passed a budget that wants to cut money from Medicaid, so they want to make basically already a struggling populace even more vulnerable by taking away the meager benefits that some working people already have, while also making permanent their tax cuts, which favor the ultra wealthy. So. And that's the theory of someone like Richard Wolff, the economist Richard Wolff, who says the reason one of Trump's main motivations in these tariffs is like he can raise some short-term revenue that could justify him going to the public and say, this is why we can afford to cut these taxes now, because look, I raised this money from tariffs. So I just don't see them. I mean, it's nice rhetoric. We want to help Main Street, not Wall Street, but what are they actually doing policy-wise for that? And yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, could targeted tariffs serve that goal? Yeah, but this wasn't targeted. This was just like across the board, and then immediately caving as soon as some of his top donors rebelled.
He claimed that he was raising like $6 trillion in revenue. The real number might be closer to $2 trillion if he had held on. And then he's going to lose all of that to use this by using this to pay for a giant tax cut for the rich. And how is that going to help Main Street? It's ridiculous. Paying for a tax cut for the rich. It was the Bush tax cuts, by the way, that reversed the U.S. surplus that could have been used to pay down Social Security, which is now a crisis that Elon Musk has been called in to fix. It's one of the few things that actually works in this country. And
she calls it the biggest Ponzi scheme in history.
Yeah. And then you have the Pentagon budget, which we'll talk about later, and entitlements. And they're attacking entitlements. They're firing masses of government workers, but they're attacking entitlements. How's that going to help Main Street?